Hello, people. Okay, I've got an outline here with a bunch of stuff, but we'll see how far we get. Um, okay, first of all, my last video, number 15, I accidentally posted to a different channel, the one I posted my earliest videos on. And if you want me to know how you can get access to that channel, shoot me a message and we'll try to figure something out. I don't know if you can send a video from one of your channels to another one of your channels, but hey, if anyone knows, let me know. Okay, so because of that, I have to briefly summarize the main important points from that last video. Number one, I don't want anyone to think that I'm a right-wing pundit, because I'm definitely not. I do say some some critical things about some kinds of socialism and some aspects of the 60s and 70s countercultures and what emerged from them. But now they say that nuance is where the internet is where nuance goes to die. But I'm going to fight this by saying there are some forms of what people refer to as socialism that I don't like, and some forms of it that I do like. There are things that happened and arose from the countercultures of the 60s and 70s that I think were bad, and some things that I think were good, and some, kind of neutral. Okay, I also may have lost one video altogether, so about Hawaii and so forth. I may have to I'll probably have to reconstruct that. Okay, now here's some corrections. First of all, in one of my videos, I said that I brought the bullying onto myself that I experienced by acting out as the school weirdo. And while that is true, that don't take that to mean that I think that bullying is justified ever. It's not. If it's not okay for an adult to beat up another adult, and they'll go to jail for it, and if it's not okay for an adult to beat up a child, and they'll go to jail for it, then there's no reason that it can be acceptable for a child to beat up another child. I'm not saying they should go to jail for it, depending on how badly they beat them, maybe, but, juvenile, obviously. But in any case, there should be consequences, and there should be no attitude of, kids will be kids. You have to teach them at an early age. Okay, I said that I talked about the Mahu thing of Polynesia, and that was a particular kind of trans woman that was recognized in different parts of Polynesia, including Hawaii. And I mentioned that, but when I got to Hawaii, by that time, it was basically interchangeable with fag. And then I kind of misspoke. What I meant to say was, in Tahiti, it's still used in the traditional way to refer to Polynesian style. Trans women. And okay. Oh, I mentioned that in Wahiwa, in Hawaii on New Year's Eve, I was babysitting my brother, who was about 5, and there was huge, massive explosions, and I opened all the windows and blasted the Velvet Underground, which probably no one could hear, but I made it unsafe. What I forgot to mention was that I also opened all the doors, all the windows, all the doors, and turned on all the lights, guaranteed to it, clearly might have attracted attention that could have been bad and dangerous. But luckily, nothing happened. Okay, now I'm going to backtrack a little, which I might really have to do when I try to replicate the Lost video. But anyhow, let's start out back in Marin County, California, when I was about 12, and I was moving to Hawaii, and they had a going away party for me. And I remember that they kind of roasted me a little. So I had, as I say, I was acting the part of weirdo to a large extent. I had heard that Tibetans drink their tea with butter and salt. So somehow when I was in school, I managed to get a hold of tea, butter, and salt, and I mixed it together and drank it in front of everybody. So one of the things they gave me at the going away party, they said, well, Ethan is known for eating weird food. So here is a gift of a can of caterpillars, canned caterpillars. I'm like, thank you, I guess. And the rest of it was kind of like that. Okay. Hawaii. Okay, this was leads up to a fun experience for me. So one of my the guys that was in the larger circle of friends, my parents hired him in Kaneohe to chop off the vegetation of this slope because the landlord insisted on it. They didn't want to. And he did, and I was talking to him. I remember that he said, well, I went to a party. I met my mother again recently when I was high on mescalero, which is kind of like peyote, and her makeup made her look like a clown. And not only that, I also felt that she was trying to fork me psychologically. Okay, he had some mommy issues. Maybe he shouldn't have put them on me, but we were hanging out together in the evening, and we smoked a joint, at least one joint, and then we were crawling around in the jungle, and there was these passion flower vines. Sorry, passion fruit vines. Passion fruit, when it's ripe, is a wonderful, exquisite fruit that tastes like it has the consistency of jelly. And it's also a vine, and we crawled through. I don't know if he knew about this place or not, but it was like a little room. Little room had been created in this hollow in the vegetation. I think some light got through. And he said, well, as long as we're here, we might as well smoke a joint. So we did. And that was one of my better marijuana experiences, was getting high in this little room made out of passion fruit vines. Okay. On the downside, I remember my brother, well, we all got, there was some harsh, like slapping on the face was a kind of a favorite punishment used by both my mother and my stepfather. And my brother may have gotten the worst of it. I think I made things worse for him, but not yet. But anyway, I remember one time he got up earlier than everyone else, and he was like, he's 3 or 4 now. He's playing with his toys alone in his room, and he makes some noise while he's doing it, And my stepfather comes in, and which is his father, kind of chews him out and then slaps him. I think that's what I think I heard. And then my mother said to him, "Well, I think you did really good." Like, well, maybe you should have talked about that before the punishment. But anywho, and another time, I forget what the topic is, but he said something along the lines of, some people do such and such. And my stepfather said, "No, people don't do such and such." And he said, "But some do." And my stepfather was factually correct, but he yelled, "No, they don't," and smacked him on the cheek again. I know I smacked him on the cheek at least once or maybe more myself. It was learned behavior. What can I say? Okay, now we're going to do some stuff relating to unpacking some terms. Well, I'm just going to talk about some of the stuff Stephen Gaskin said, unpack it, probably go on some side tangents. Okay, so his view on vibes. He said in, I think, one of his talks, he said that in the old Westerns, an Indian will come around the corner around some rocks and say, "Oh, bad spirits." And that could have been made with a hippie instead of the Indian going around and saying, "Oh, bad vibes." There are people all over the world, have been and still are people all over the world of all races who believe in the literal existence of spirits. So when Stephen made that comparison, it seemed to imply that vibes have like a literal metaphysical existence. And I'm here to tell you they don't. People are just unconsciously or consciously picking up facial and verbal signals, as I've said before, and are too inarticulate, maybe from being high, to be specific. And so they just say bad vibes. Okay. Now, getting back to the general ideas behind socialism and so first off, I'll start with something positive in my view. Stephen wrote some essays for a local newspaper, which I read. And it was basically the first time I was introduced to the concept of corporate personhood, which is that under the law, corporations are literally considered to be people under the law and have the same rights as people, which I believe is utterly absurd. And so did he. And then he basically compared corporations to demons because they are considered to be people, but they have no soul. And he's not the first to say that. Andrew Jackson said something like that, but he didn't compare them to demons. And he said, maybe the demons of today are, Monsanto, Exxon. He listed a bunch of big corporations. And if you take that metaphorically, fair point. Actually, a good point. But then, all right. So he didn't like welfare. He did not like people doing welfare. He had this like Puritan work ethic. So first of all, in one of his writings, he said, if you're on welfare, you're not enlightened. I don't care if you can fly and see through walls. If you're on welfare, you're not enlightened. Maybe if you could fly and see through walls, you could get a job. I don't know, could earn a living. But also, really, like, where does the word enlightenment that we have in English come from? Mostly via Buddhism. And the monks in Buddhism, Hinduism, and really most monastics live by begging or receiving financial donations of food or money, maybe, places to live for free and so forth. They live off the larger community. Yeah, they do. When I was in the Adobe, somebody was talking to the teenagers, said, now remember, you're all monks and nuns, and you should think of yourself that way. And we weren't, and neither were they. Monastics are not supposed to have sex. Of course, some do, but they're not supposed to, and they're not family people. They're not supposed to have kids unless they already have some from before they became monastics, but they're not supposed to make any new kids, and they're not supposed to hold regular jobs. They're supposed to devote most of their time to praying, meditating, whatever, maybe serving the community in some way, teaching, but they're not family people. There's a clear distinction made in between householders and monastics in pretty much all traditions that have monastics. Okay, but here we go. Stephen did not like welfare. He said that you can't get enlightened if you're on welfare. So I want to unpack that a little. And he also supported Jerry Brown in his first run for governor. And Jerry Brown has been called a canoe politician, because sometimes he rose to the left and sometimes he rose to the right. When he ran for president, he attracted mostly left-leaning people. But when he ran for governor, he was running on an anti-welfare campaign. And Stephen backed him. And since he had like 1,300 people who would do whatever he said, that was significant. Okay. I've been talking about the farm as being part of the utopian socialist community. I mean, tradition. And what I mean by that, so utopian socialism, which goes back, I think, to the 17th century, these are people who, they're not trying to gain control of the government, either through violent revolution, like communists, or through the electoral process, like democratic socialists. Instead, they get a piece of land. Maybe they buy it, maybe they squat it. It depends. And they try to create their own version of a utopian. Utopian, I don't think meant totally perfect back then, but of a good micro society run on socialism, as they conceive it. Each one is separate, is individual, so they, that means different things, and also collectivizing farms and so forth, which, okay, because the nation is entirely covered with nation states. I mean, the planet is virtually all covered with nation states, except maybe Antarctica and a couple other spots. These little communes still have to function under the government and laws of whatever country they're in, and the economic systems of whatever country they happen to be in. So they can't ever really be totally autonomous for very long. So in communist countries, basically these kinds of communes and cooperatives were smashed, or they were forcibly integrated into government communes, collectives. And so they simply weren't allowed to continue to exist. In capitalist societies, they could exist as long as they could pay for stuff. They were never really, at least in in recent times, they weren't really ever able to grow their own food and such to be totally self-sufficient. They still had to pay for stuff, and that meant that they had to sell stuff to the outside world and interact with the marketplace. And that's why the farm sold a lot of its best vegetables to supermarkets, including the tomatoes they sorted through for the ones that were the right shape to go on hamburger buns, even though they were vegan. So, but since they are part of the larger society, they should, and generally do to some extent, participate in the politics of the larger society. The kibbutzes in Israel are a good example of that. And so you would think that they would tend to support something like democratic socialism because they themselves are socialists. So they would want the rest of the society to be non-authoritarian socialist. Actually, as I mentioned, Stephen had a strange affiliation with some of the leaders of authoritarian socialist societies, i.e. communism. The United States has never been any kind of socialism. There have been big socialist and communist parties. They've had mayors here and there that were socialists. Some of them built the sewer systems. But it's never been a socialist society. The closest we've ever had is social welfare programs. And this was started by it was started by Franklin Delano Roosevelt during the depths of the Great Depression, largely, I think, to avoid a real, literal revolution because there were big communist, socialist, and fascist movements. So that's what he did. And it kind of worked. It got us through until World War II started and fixed the economy, weirdly. And then it was continued by John F. Kennedy to a certain extent, and then really by Lyndon Johnson, who had his good and bad points. But why did this need to happen? Welfare programs, food stamps, housing subsidies, all that sort of thing. Well, at the time, agricultural jobs were largely disappearing in the South. And so many people, and yes, many of them were Black, but many of them were white, including a bunch of Appalachians. Side note, a bunch of Appalachians who had internally emigrated to Chicago, formed a close alliance with the Black Panthers at one point. Okay, so there were white people and Black people who came to the North because they were poor people to start with, and their farming jobs were disappearing. But at the same time, in the North, a lot of the factory jobs, industrial jobs, were also disappearing. And I think Lyndon Johnson could see the writings on the wall. These were very restless times. There were a lot of riots, a lot of radical organizations. He realized it could get much worse. So he started creating more of all that stuff: welfare programs, food stamp programs, um, housing subsidies. At one point, the Black Panthers started giving away free breakfast to children in Oakland, and that kind of forced the state of California to provide free school lunches to poor people, which I participated in that program. Yeah, so it was definitely flawed, but it was definitely needed. If they hadn't had it, what would have happened? There would have been people sleeping on the streets. There would have been people eating out of dumpsters and trash cans, you know? There would have been all those things that started happening in large numbers in the 1980s as soon as Reagan got into power and started slashing those programs. And yeah, my this is definitely a tangent, but I'm going to further defend social welfare programs. So the United States never has full employment, and this is by design. When we get close, or the Federal Reserves start raising the interest rates to create more unemployment. There isn't high employment now, but nevertheless, the Federal Reserves are doing that to slow down inflation. And the result of that is that it's not possible for 100% of the population to be employed ever. But meanwhile, they still have to survive. And it would be nice if they had housing and so forth. Mass homelessness leads to the degradation. You know, the more people that don't have private spaces, the more degradation there is of public spaces, such as parks, sidewalks, transportation systems, and so forth. It hurts everybody except the wealthy that can manage to stay isolated from public spaces all the time. And then, okay, this is an argument, and I can understand why, especially low-income working people would make that argument. They're like, so why should we have to work hard, and these people get to live on welfare for free? So first of all, only a very small amount. Okay, first of all, and it's way worse now than it was in the 70s, but the poor and middle class pay way more in taxes than they should, the working poor and the middle class. And the corporations and ultra rich pay much, much less than they should. And also only a small sliver of that program goes to social welfare programs, where the majority of money goes to highly bloated military budgets, police budgets, prison budgets, corporate subsidies, like paying farmers to not grow food, bailing out banks, having the taxpayers pay for building large sports stadiums and then turning it over to a wealthy person who makes all the profit that that stadium generates, which is called socialism for the rich, privatization for the poor. So I say, and also if it weren't for social welfare, and some people are disabled and can't function in the marketplace, certainly not well enough to be fully self-sufficient. Yeah, so I say give welfare a break. That's my rant on that. So you can now know that I'm not a right-wing pundit. Okay. What else? Okay. When I was on the farm, and also in other places, I got this message. Being 13 at the time, it wasn't that unreasonable, but they said, you need more experiences. That's what you need. You need more experience, more life experiences. One time after me and my friends got busted for sneaking out and going to a grocery store, and you know, they came on down, I think, really hard on us, and especially Leslie, the gatekeeper. People said something like, you know, well, at least you didn't have to deal with the cops. And I said, Leslie is the cops. And they said, well, you've never dealt with the real cops. Which was true. It wasn't very long before I did. And I don't know if there was he's not really exactly like the cops, but still way too authoritarian. And by the way, where else can you not leave to go to the store? Prisons, jails, institutions. But as a result of getting this message, I took it upon myself to collect as many life experiences as I possibly could. And I really did. And as my brother said, you know, by the age of 15, I had done more stuff, had more variety of experiences than most people do, like in their life. And then I continued to have more. So, yeah. All right. That's all we need to say about the farm right now. So I'm on the Greyhound bus. For the second, I had taken a long bus trip to get to Nashville. Oh yeah, they couldn't just when they kicked me off the farm, obviously they couldn't just kick me off. They had to drive me, and it was Roger who drove me to the bus station. And he also felt that he had to wait until I got on the bus. Did I already talk about this last time? I think maybe I did. The woman said, I'm a Christian woman, thank God. Okay. I think I already said that. Okay, we're on the bus. Now, in those days, Greyhound did not have a contract with fast food places that resulted in the fast food places being the only place they stopped for meal breaks. So they stopped at all kinds of funky diners, and especially in the South, there was various, you know, which actually I think is better. But like after having been mostly vegan for so long, and then all this greasy fried chicken and stuff was a little off-putting to me. And I got the idea in my head that maybe I should be a vegetarian. You know, when everybody was a vegetarian and I had to break the rules to not be, I wasn't. But now that I'm in mainstream society and it's a pain in the butt for me and other people who want to help me out and feed me, for me to be a vegetarian, suddenly I got the idea that I should be one, naturally. But I wasn't really thinking too much about that at the moment. I had other things on my mind. And I met this guy, I'll call him Jack, in New Mexico. He was like stranded and trying to get some money to move on by selling his stuff. And I was at a New Mexico Greyhound station at night, and I bought a canteen and a sleeping bag from him, which turned out to be very useful when I became voluntarily homeless for a bit. And later, I would meet these guys. That same guy ended up in the Sausalito houseboat community for a good while, and I got to know him. So that's a coincidence. We I sat next to this old man, and at some point, I don't know how we knew, but we were crossing by the US-Mexico border. And so I was looking right into Mexico, but there were no border patrols, no checkpoints, no walls of any sort. And I said to the guy, they talk about drugs and illegal aliens coming in from Mexico. And he said, well, what the hell's stopping them? Unfortunately, I think there's a lot more to stop them now. Too much. That's another bloated budget your taxpayers go for. Oh yeah. I was also sitting next to this woman as we passed through Muskogee, Oklahoma, and she said, I think she was getting off there, but before we got there, she said, when I heard the song Okie from Muskogee, which was a very well-known song in those days, I thought that Muskogee must be a terrible redneck town, but it isn't. All right. And then I was also sitting. So you wind up on long trips. You wind up sitting next to different people. I was talking to this one guy. I forget what I said, but later he was talking to somebody else, and I heard him. He said, "Yeah, I was talking to this boy. He seemed kind of, aimless, drifting. Maybe he's a runaway." And he was right. I had decided to be a runaway. And I had talked to a teenager on the farm who had said that the best place to be a runaway is Phoenix, Arizona, which I don't think was true. Maybe I had asked him about something like where's the best place to be a runaway, something like that. So I did get off the Greyhound station in Phoenix. And since Greyhound stations are usually located in Skid Row areas, it's not surprising that I made my way to the Salvation Army, which in those days was already old. The tramps, there was a whole, tradition of tramps knowing about it, and they called it Sally Ann. I don't know if they still do or not, but it's definitely still around. And so they had, I went in there. I had to listen to some kind of a sermon, like literally a sermon. I don't recall the content, but I do think he was kind of derogatory of the people that he was talking to, homeless people, bums. They didn't used to call them the homeless. They called them bumps, tramps, hobo. Well, I don't know how much they called them hobos at that point, but yeah, that kind of thing. And then I got to sleep in the shelter, and you were only allowed to sleep in the shelter one night a month. So I used it up on the first night, and I remember hearing people snoring, but it wasn't so bad. Oh yeah, but when they served me the meal after the sermon, I remember it was a plate of beans and a tangerine, basically. And I had been eating beans for so long, and I just looked at it. You would have thought I would have gotten used to it, but instead I had gotten phobic about it, really. And I was like, I just can't eat another plate of beans. And the tramps around me started giving me their tangerine. A number of them gave me their tangerines, which was really nice of them, considering how little they had. I suppose someone probably ate my beans, but this was a general trend in Phoenix. The homeless people I met there were really nice to me. Mostly, for the most part, they were really nice to me. I hadn't been used to adults being very nice to me when I was on the farm, and not necessarily all that nice to me at home either. Yeah. And so this time that I was homeless in Phoenix, I actually really enjoyed most of it. It may sound weird, but I remember waking up in the morning. There were already these people I knew were all around me. I was right in the middle of the action. You know, I hung out and talked to them and whatever. I have to make it clear, very clear, that in the year of 1977, which it was, there were much fewer homeless people. And as a result, I really think being homeless was much easier. It was less of a problem for the population at large who had to deal with them. And it was less of a problem for them because, you know, resources run thin, human compassion runs thin. They start getting meaner and taking it out on each other. All sorts of different elements enter the scene. Yeah. We were sleeping in an alley next to a soup kitchen. And so that's where we ate. And to me, the food there, as opposed to the Salvation Army, was really not bad. I told you that on the farm, I had come to view spaghetti as a luxury item food. And I remember one day they did give us spaghetti, this time hot and with sauce. So that's pretty good. And and this one guy, he was, you know, he was one of the gang. He may have been a little not quite there mentally, but he also was nice to me. You know, he kind of rambled a little, but I remember he was saying, yeah, me and so were doing this and that, and we did this all for you. We even said so. It was a joke, but I kind of liked it. And then he said, do you know any place, you know, this is really a good place. Do you know anywhere else where they'll give you spaghetti and sauce just for being? And I thought, he had a point. And then I walked around a bit. They with those other, they were really trying to look out for me. Sometimes it was a bit misguided, but their hearts were in the right place. So one of them, I had given away my bus ticket to Oakland, the rest of it to one of them, and he, of course, disappeared. But I was somewhere, and one of the guys said, "Hey, the cops are here." And of course, it was illegal for me to be there because I was a runaway. He said, "Why don't you go in there?" So I went in there not knowing what it was, and it turned out to be, I don't know, but there was an AA meeting in progress, my first one. And I was only in there for for a few minutes. And he said, "Well, now I'd like to explain our perspective on God, on a higher power." That's the term I came to prefer later. That he said, "During the Depression, I went to the Salvation Army, and I had to listen to a sermon just to get a plate of beans, and I was turned off, and my jaw practically hit the floor because I had just had that experience like 1 or 2 nights ago." And yeah, they really do say that is the thing about them, is that they often do say things that other people with similar backgrounds can really relate to. Uh, Anyways, when I got out, I told the guy, I went I went in there, and there was an AA meeting going on, and he said, "Oh, you had to listen to an AA sermon." I said, "Yeah, but actually I had kind of liked listening to it." Maybe it planted a seed in my brain. Okay. So another thing, of course, I did on the street was cop drugs, pills, and alcohol mainly. I remember drinking this cheap wine called somebody's Irish Rose. And that was Wine01. I don't know if it's still around. And then I bought some pills, which I were told were morphine. They were probably really mild downers, if that. But then another day, I bought real downers. I bought 6 Libriums and took them all at once. And then I believe I joined the other folks in drinking whiskey. That was a potentially fatal combination. I now know. But fortunately, nothing bad happened. I fell asleep. I woke up. I told the other guys how much I'd paid for the Librium, and they confronted the guy who had sold them to me. Now, I actually think they should have been chastising him for selling me that many Librium at once without any advice on how to take them, or not to mix them with alcohol or whatever. That's what they should have been chastising him about. But instead, they chastised him about charging me too much. So their intentions were in the right place. And the guy said, "Well, after he took them, he fell asleep." And one of them said, "Well, isn't that the night we had the whiskey? I fell asleep too." And one of them, I mean, they'd scold me a little, but they were basically being father figures, mostly father figures. They were all men. Not everyone that hung out there was a man, and not everything I saw there was good. I was sitting there one time, and this short, skinny guy was standing next to this big, tall, broad woman. And yeah, she was Native American, it happened, and he was Caucasian. And he said, "This is my squaw, and I'm damn proud of her." And she seemed to like that, I think. But then a minute later, she punched him. And it was one of those things I've had it happen to me where this punch just comes out of nowhere. No buildup, no argument, just all of a sudden she punched him. And I think she was surprised that she had done it. And she did a good job of it. He fell to the ground and he was bleeding. And then the ambulance arrived and said, "You should come with us." And he said, "Only if she comes with me. I'm not going unless she comes with me." So she got into the ambulance too. And I told my father that story later, and he said, "You see that? They always talk about how battered women will stick with their batterer. And you see that? It works the opposite way too." And it does. I've learned that, and now no one can tell me otherwise because I've seen it with my own two eyes. Anyways, at some point, maybe I met this other teenager who acted like he knew it all. And he said that I should ditch my sleeping bag and canteen so that I wouldn't obviously be a homeless person, which I don't think really worked. So I did that. And then one of the older guys said, "What did you do that for? When you go to bed at night, you need a sleeping bag. And when you wake up, you need a canteen." And I said, "Well, the canteen was leaking," which may or not have been true. But he said, "Well, I didn't know that." But he was trying to train me to survive and be relatively comfortable as a homeless person. But I went off with this kid. He acted like he knew it all, and he didn't. I guess he was a bit older than me, a teenager. He asked me he advised me to not show my ID to the police, and to not tell them my name or anything. I don't know if he ditched it. I'm not sure if I ditched it, but anyway, basically I believed him and took his advice. We were in a cotton field at night, and he said, "Oh, would you like to take some purple haze?" Which was reputed to be some very strong LSD. It's the one that Jimi Hendrix's song "Purple Haze" was about. So I said, "Sure." And I thought I was tripping. I remember being like, the cars were going by and I was like scared. And he was like, "What are you so scared of?" And the stuff, like the dead leaves in the cotton field, looked like other things. I wasn't really hallucinating. It was kind of like cloud gazing. It's like, "Oh, that one looks like a cat, that one." Anyway, I think it was either very mild LSD or it was all placebo effect. It definitely wasn't, although it looked like a little small piece of purple plastic or gelatin or something. It looked like it but it was not the real thing, purple haze. Okay. Anywho, um, and and then we were wandering around some neighborhood and we were thirsty because, of course, I ditched my canteen. So we went into some woman's house to get water. She gave us water. I think I may have started looking for stuff and she said, okay, you've got your water, now go. And so we're stumbling, we're wandering around. And then he says, would you like a Quaalude? Where did he get all this stuff? And of course I said, sure. I don't know if it was really a Quaalude. I kind of doubt it, but it was some kind of downer. So we're stumbling around, going nowhere. And finally the police do pick us up. And, he asked for our name, our ID, whatever the policeman does. And the same guy who had advised me, who had told me not to tell them or show them anything like that, he immediately started cooperating. Like, he got scared, he forgot what he'd said, if he'd ever thought it through in the first place, and he just totally started cooperating with them. And it was that point that I realized he did not really know what he was talking about, and I should not have been taking his advice. If I had wanted to stay homeless in Phoenix, which I had. So, at any rate, I'm on to juvenile hall. Okay. Did I find juvenile hall? So now I'm dealing with the real cops. They told me on the farm, oh, you need to, if you think we're bad, you need to deal with the real cops. And one of them had actually said, in juvenile hall, they give the teens Thorazine. And then when they go out, they'll get hooked on something like barbiturates because they're used to Thorazine. And no, they don't. That's mental institutions he was thinking about, not juvenile halls. So I got my own room. I got along with the other kids, I talked to one of them about my drug use, and he was like, oh, I told him, like everything I'd taken, and he was like, oh, that was my daily intake, bragging that he'd taken way more. But there was no fear, there was no hostility. I know it was probably it wasn't a juvenile hall for serious offenders. It was for petty offenders like me. And then I remember, obviously, we were separate from the girls, but for some reason, the girls walked through the room where all the boys were. Of course, we were looking at them, but they were looking at us. And and I don't think I have ever seen girls look at boys like with that kind of hunger, like raw hunger. But of course, neither of us could do anything about it because they were marched to their own quarters. And then we had some school there, and we had a cooking class, and we made a milkshake with canned pineapple. And I ate it. And oh my God, that was like the best thing I'd ever tasted. I'd heard that jail food, institutional food is bad, which most of the time it is. But I mean, how low had my standards been set? I found it to be exquisite. At least in that case, and I don't think it was bad. The regular meals didn't bother me. I don't remember them bothering me either. I think they were fine for me at that time. So, now No, I remember what it was. I had only ditched my canteen, and we did keep our sleeping bag at least for a night. And we were in the cotton field, but then we found a ditch. And we did, I don't remember whether I had sleeping bags or not, actually. Probably I didn't, actually. Sorry. But we slept in a ditch that night. And then the next day, we got busted, and I never saw him again, which really is all right. Anyway, or we didn't. We spent, actually, I'm so sorry. I actually did spend the whole night in a cotton field and not a ditch. Okay, sorry. Anywho, da, 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 da. So I thought juvenile hall was just fine. I was like organizing my stuff, my little bit of stuff. When they had picked me up, I had genuinely been on some kind of downer, and they gave me an envelope to put, I guess, to put my stuff in, which they would give me back when I was leaving. And I had my name on it, and I said, "My little envelope." And one of them said, "You're on drugs, aren't you?" The cops, one of the cops. Okay. All right. So now I go back to Richmond, California with my father in the same apartment, in the same boring town, working class town. Now I realize Chevron has been in Richmond a lot of for a while, for a long time, and it hasn't been good for it either. But it did provide jobs, and a lot of those working class folks and I met the children of them, many black, some white. Probably a lot of them worked for Chevron. But I was not happy there. Once again, white walls, nothing decorated, because my landlord was blind, and getting a bit cranky. When I was with the children of God, I had tried to lay hands on him and do a miracle healing to give him sight, like Jesus did. And of course, it didn't work. So I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but he was kind of not crazy about me. And he also had a girlfriend, a blind girlfriend, about his age. Good for him. But he put this little fence, which is really designed for toddlers, between the main area and the kitchen. And I undid it pretty easily because I was hungry, and that's where the food was. And later he said, "Did somebody undo the gate?" I probably could have done it back, but I didn't. And my father actually lied to cover me and said, "I did." And he said, "Well, I know that this wall was not impossible to get through. I was indicating that I wanted privacy." And my father later said, "What he did not understand is that you cannot keep a boy of 13, 14 from a refrigerator. You just can't do it." Later, I got in trouble with my mother and stepfather for raiding the refrigerator in their house when I was supposed to be staying downstairs in the bottom half of the house. Not raiding, just taking some stuff from us, and she caught me being upstairs. And that was the problem. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay. My father was not in a very good space right now, and I'm sure I didn't help. I also was dealing with a lot, but I was dealing with like early adolescent kinds of stuff, and he was dealing with late middle age type of stuff. His mother was dying, and he himself had to go to the hospital for stomach surgery. And I was not all that empathetic. Yeah, I was kind of self-centered, which is normal for 13 or just turned 14. But also, I kind of had been put through a bit of a ringer. My father had a friend who came over. He had, honestly, the chronology of things that happened to me in that house before I left for the farm and after I got back are a little hard for me to keep straight. But so this, when I had been with the children of God, I had tried to preach to him as well, and he had, argued against what I was saying, and he was right. I didn't love the tone he said it in. But this time he was pretty obnoxious. So I remember telling him that on the farm, the tofu we ate wasn't even block tofu. It was this mushy stuff. Honestly, I had been underfed, and I was trying to discharge really some trauma, some degree of trauma, I think. And what he said after I told him that we didn't have block tofu was, so your slogan, it was "Block is beautiful," playing on the slogan of the time, "Black is beautiful." That I was talking about being underfed, and he turned it into a bad pun. Okay. And then he started getting on my father's case because he wanted my father to write for television. Now, my father lived in poverty for most of his life because he was a serious writer. And with rare exception, there were exceptions, but mostly he refused to write crappy stuff. He only wrote, stuff that he considered to be quite good, which most of it was. Well, this guy wanted him to write for TV because it paid better. And he said no. And the guy just kept persisting. He said, it's just a matter of 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, 5, write it this way. In other words, follow a formula. And he said, no. And he said, well, do it for your son because he deserves it. He didn't say anything. And then my father didn't. And then the guy turns to me and said, well, what do you think? And I said, don't do it for me because I don't need it. And I think this was a combination of, me having picked up the anti-materialism from folks that I was around, which did not include my mother and stepfather, by the way. But also, even if I was being rebellious against my father and a pain in the butt, nevertheless, when I saw somebody picking on him like that, Yeah, and especially when he asked my opinion, I did take his side. My father's side. That is okay. Um, so I was bored. I was so bored, and but I hitchhiked around. Um, time, I think my father called some friends over because he was anxious because I had disappeared. Oh, by the way, when the police had called him called him from Phoenix Juvenile Hall, and they said, "Will you pay for him for a ticket back?" And I said, "Yes." And so I guess he called the airport to arrange a flight back for me. And they said, "Well, we've got this one flight and it only has one stop in." And he said, stop talking. I don't want a flight with any stops in it, because he didn't want me to get off the plane again. He said, "I don't want you to be herding mules in Encino or something." I very likely would have. But instead I just hitchhiked around. So I revisited the Children of God in Oakland. Um, and naturally they they wanted me to rejoin. Um, the Children of God practice something called love bombing, which perhaps is related to flirty fishing, but they would just tell everybody, "I love you. I love you." And when I had been in it, Avram had told me that he had visited himself after I had joined, and he later said, "With all those beautiful young women saying, 'We love you,' I was tempted to join myself." And of course, that was the idea. And it's called, I don't know if they call it, I don't think they called it that, but a lot of cults do that, and the term has become known as love bombing. But why do people join cults? There had been so many places where I did not feel welcome, where I was made to feel unwelcome. And these are people that wanted me. Nevertheless, I had gone too far away from them. So I did not rejoin, but I remember one of them. He called me by my old Children of God name. He remembered me, and he said, "Well, what are you gonna do? Genesis, what are you gonna do?" And I said, "Well, doing something is better than doing nothing, right?" He had said, "Are you just going to go around having adventures?" And I said, "Well, doing something's better than doing nothing, right?" And I was quoting back to him something from a Mo letter, so I knew he couldn't contradict me. And he said, "Well, yes," from a Mo letter being the writings of David Berg. Okay. I also weirdly went and visited the satellite of the farm. They had satellite groups, and one was in California, not far away. So I went there and I met a teenage girl that I had known on the farm in Tennessee. I did note now that I had seen ordinary fed American white people, with pink cheeks, I really did notice the contrast. Her face was white, Casper white, like albino white, practically. But nevertheless, when I was leaving, she hugged me, and she hugged me tightly. which made me think, maybe she's into me. And the pale complexion wasn't enough to deter me. So I went back again. And when I went there the second time, the guy said, just because you were on the farm in Tennessee doesn't give you any special privileges. And I thought, oh, they're obnoxious a-holes too, here too. Oh, well. And I left and did not come back to any version of the farm ever again. Okay. Drugs. So after stomach surgery, my father had been given a combination of prescriptions for fairly high dose seconal barbiturate, which was called Reds at the time, and these fairly high dose chloral hydrates, which were green. There was clearly a line in the middle. You could split them in half. They were called trees on the streets. And after he ran out of what the doctors had originally prescribed, he told my stepfather, that was the only combination that has ever put me asleep, despite my insomnia. I wonder if you could prescribe me for them again. My father being a doctor, and he said, and my stepfather did it. He did a lot of maybe a bit sketchy pill prescriptions for his friends, which was easier to do back then. And when he went, this time he went to get the prescription filled, and the pharmacist was so skeptical about it being real that he said, I have to call your doctor to confirm this. So he called his doctor, namely my stepfather, and asked to confirm that the prescription was real and not forged. And it was. And that gave me the opportunity to try some of those downers. So on one occasion, I took one seconal. I'd heard of them, Reds. And I think I'd heard something about how at first they gave you energy before they make you sleepy, which I don't really think that's true either. The best you can do if you don't lie down is kind of stumble around. And some people enjoy that. And I enjoyed it. I felt a bit of energy, maybe placebo. And then I stumbled around and then I enjoyed it. For the most part, all that taking barbiturates, other than a very mild dose, all it has done is put me to sleep. So the next time we were going to a New Year's Eve party that he'd been invited to, and for some stupid reason, I got it into my head to take 3 Reds. And I started throwing up in the car on the way to the party. They got me out of the car. I hurled some more, and they drove me back to my father's house, where I, of course, fell asleep. So, I blew that New Year's Eve even before I got to the party. Okay. And my father, by this time, he had decided he did not like marijuana, but he did like hashish. And he invited me to smoke some with him in front of a fire. And by the way, he did also teach me how to build a fire. He which I sort of remembered, but he lit a fire, and then he somehow he mixed hashish with tobacco, um, which worked for him because he was already a cigarette smoker. But I wasn't. I tried it, but I wasn't. And since I was trying to get high, I treated it like a joint and inhaled and held it. Uh, so I did get high. I did enjoy the fire. But at some point, once again, I went into the bathroom and hurled. And I think that was the tobacco. That was the effect of the tobacco. I did save the rest of it and smoke a little more before I finally gave up and ditched it. And then I came back, and my father said, have you come down yet? I think I maybe had partially come down, but I didn't understand the intention of the question, so I said yes. And then he scolded me for something. I don't remember what, but I realized that I had not fully come down, and now I was in a bummer state. So I went to the bathroom and took a seconal and a chloral hydrate. Didn't split it, took the whole thing. I've said before that a lot of youthful rebellion is really imitation. And these are some good examples of that, you know. I was, it appeared to me and to my parents that I was defiant and that I was rebelling against them. And while that was true, a lot of that rebellion consisted of doing the stuff that I did, that they did, maybe not as, maybe improperly or whatever. Anywho, after that, he said he came close enough himself to a bad trip that he never smoked hash again either. Okay. And then I moved back in to my mother and stepfather's place in Sausalito. So finally I'm there. And since we've almost reached an hour and a half, I am going to end this here. Bye bye.